Welcome to Founders Future, the podcast hosted by Closers.io, where we dive deep into the journeys of innovative entrepreneurs and explore the road ahead for both themselves and their companies. I'm your host, Elliot Boll, and in each episode, we'll uncover the stories behind successful businesses, the challenges faced along the way, and the strategies driving their future expansion. Today, we're excited to be joined by Minda Harts, the founder and CEO of The Memo. We'll be learning more about her founding story and getting a glimpse into her plans for the future. So let's jump right in, Minda. Welcome to Founders Future.
Hey, Elliot. I wish I sounded as cool as you, but you're going to get the California accent.
Well, you say that, we should definitely switch. I think I'm monotone and boring. Anyway, I'll take your accent any day, Minda, but let's jump in. I don't want to waste any time, and I really want to get to what I would think of as the juicy bit. So you founded The Memo, it looks like almost 10 years ago now. Can you give us the kind of story, like the inspiration that made you create the business, and help our audience understand a little bit about what you get up to?
Yeah, I almost a decade this year I've been in business, and I have the wrinkles to prove it, Elliot. But I literally was in my former career as a consultant in corporate America, and I was always the only woman in the room, and I just felt like my voice was sometimes not getting heard or being talked over. And it just year after year after year of that, it just starts to get a little bit isolating. And I was the youngest, so I had like all of these different like barriers that I felt still doing my job and doing it well, but just not finding a sense of community and belonging that I saw some of my other colleagues have at other companies. And so in 2015, I started this blog. It's an archaic thing that many of you may have heard of. And I started this blog, and every Monday I started writing about my experiences in the workplace and just giving career tips, basically as therapy for myself, and maybe hopeful that somebody else would read it outside of my mom and my brothers. And so eventually people started to read it, and they started to like the career advice I was giving. And then about a year later, I started doing these career boot camps around New York City on Saturdays. Once a month, I would pick a topic, and I would kind of pass out flyers and market and say, hey, if you're a woman in the workplace and you need support in these areas, come get in a career boot camp. And I did that for many, many years. And eventually the blogs and the boot camps turned into, $1 million company, multi-million-dollar company, books and products. And I am a go-to voice for Fortune 100 and 500 companies on how to make the workplace work for everybody. And it all started from that little blog.
That's a goosebump story. What a journey. And to think you were going into the vlog, like you were saying, to capture your own learnings, a little bit of therapeutic and get it out there, to the success that you've had. That must bring you a smile every morning, even if it rains. That's wonderful. Now, tell us, because along that journey, there must have been several bumps and challenges. And what I'm after is maybe one that stood out to you and how you were able to navigate it.
Yeah, well, plenty of bumps. I wish that I could tell you that I was an overnight success, but even to get to where I am, it took 10 years and it took consistency. I had to write the blog for at least 4.5 years before I had an opportunity to do something else and make it a little bit more profitable. But what I will say is I was struggling, Elliot, when I was putting out this career content. I was going through a lot in my workplace, a lot of reorganizations, layoffs, just feeling like being bullied at work. And so even in the midst of trying to build my business and still keep my 9 to 5 at the time, I was going through it. So I was being this voice of hope for everybody else, but I was going through it in mine. And I remember probably around 2017, 2018, maybe even 2019, right before my first book came out, I had an investor say, hey, you know what? I'll buy you out. I wasn't making any money at the time. And if you don't focus on this, but you focus on something else. And I felt in my gut that that was the wrong thing to do, even though I was, robbing Peter to pay Paul for the career boot camps and those sorts of things to keep them running. But I stayed true to what my core purpose was, and that was helping women who felt like they didn't have a voice inside the workplace to build their self-advocacy and their confidence. And even though I could have took the easy route, I struggled for another few years before I was profitable, because I knew what my vision was. I knew what my why was. And even on those moments where I'm like, the negative balance, when I finally jumped out on my own, but it all paid off. And I think that's the part. You just have to know why you're doing it. No, don't just do the thing because somebody else is doing it or I'm doing it. Understand your why, because your why will get you to finish the race.
That's incredible. And we hear about the why all along, but to hear your burning why and the power of reconnecting through it throughout a journey of adversity, no doubt, effort, all of these things that can eat people up, it's fascinating. One of the things, as I hear your story, it makes me think of conversations I've had with other founders about this notion of work-life balance. Do you have a certain perspective on whether it's achievable as an entrepreneur, or is there a different frame or lens that you look at that kind of topic?
Yeah, I'm in the camp, Elliot, where I don't believe in a work-life balance, but I believe in trying to achieve work-life harmony. Because the reality is, I was working a 70-hour-a-week job, and then on nights and weekends working another 40 hours on my business, right? So there was no real balance between the two. I was working for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but what I found is, can I provide harmony? Because I do have a life outside of my work, and there's people who love me and want me at my best too, and want to experience me outside of just work Minda 24/7, right? So I think we do have to find harmony. Otherwise, we're going to burn out. And I've hit the burnout wall too. So now it's really important for me to prioritize my time and my rest and my health.
Phenomenal. Okay. Well, it sounds like you almost have to learn the hard way. There's elements of committing. It's probably seasons and different aspects that go through the journey. Now, you obviously mentioned coming up to a decade in business, which I think is a phenomenal achievement in and of itself. But what does the year hold? I'm curious, what are you prioritizing? What are you most excited about as it relates to growing the business?
Yeah, when I think about business growth, it's so important. I think about those companies that you might be too young to remember this company, Elliot, but Kodak and BlackBerry and those sorts of things, they were like at the top of their game. And then at some point in time, they may not have evolved with the current times, right? And so 2024 was really a big year for me to think about evolution. How do I create evergreen content? How do I make sure that I'm still servicing the people that started with me, but also tapping into a new base too? And so I realized that some of the content that I had been working on over the last decade is still important, but how do I tell it in a fresh way? And so over the past year, I've been working on gamifying some of our content, and it's been going really, really well. I launched a trust catalyst game that I'm playing at different companies and organizations, and creating new frameworks to help companies no matter what year it is.
That's phenomenal. I like the idea of gamifying because, I mean, I don't know so much, but I've read that a lot of learning happens when it's experiential, when we like it, when it's interactions with others. So I'm curious to learn more about that another time. Now, looking at the year ahead, I'm sure you've got your eye on an obstacle or two that could get in the way. Can you share for our listeners maybe one of the obstacles or blockers that you see in front of your success and how you're thinking about navigating it?
That's a great question, because for the past decade, my core constituency or my stakeholders have been women in the workplace. And so as I thought about expanding my table, not that I abandoned my core group who's been down for me 10 toes down, but also thinking about how do I get the workplace to work for everybody, not just women, right? One of the blockers I think that I've been chiseling away at this year and beyond is, how do I bring others into the fold? And so right now I'm working on some projects like the gamified version of some of my talks, because some men might not come to self-advocacy or women in the workplace event, but they will come to experience, how do we build more trust? How do we build more capacity? And so I call this next era of my business my crossover album, Elliot, because I want to make sure that I'm bringing everybody along with me, because I think that our success in the workplace and out of the workplace is not a solo sport. The challenge is to see that the men need my services too.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it sounds like you're on a next level of mission to have an impact here, which definitely excites me. Now, the conversation's absolutely flown by, Minda. One of the questions that we love to ask our guests is, you've got a bunch of founders that are listening to our conversation today. if you could share one message or one piece of advice with them that could change their life, could change their business, what would it be?
I would say don't compare yourself. I think throughout my very early years and mid-level of my entrepreneurship journey, I was always comparing myself to what other founders and entrepreneurs were doing, but it's apples and oranges. Focus on your own paper, run your own race. And some of those people that I was comparing myself to over the years are no longer in business. And I don't revel in that, but I'm saying if we focus and stay committed to what we're doing, you're going to run your own race.
Phenomenal. Well, thank you so much. For those that are curious about following the next part of your journey or getting in touch, where should we point them to?
Go to mindaharts.com and follow me on LinkedIn.
Incredible. Now that wraps up another inspiring episode of Founders Future. I want to thank Minda for sharing not only her incredible journey, but the insights that she shared throughout the conversation today. To our listeners, if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe to Founders Future wherever you listen. You can find more resources and insights at closers.io, where we're dedicated to helping businesses accelerate their sales. Until then, keep climbing and we'll see you on the next one.